Is it really true that the Dadaab refugee camp is a security threat to the country?
Major one. In the factory.
How can you explain that?
That was the place where those who did not have any other way to come into the country used to come through. There are some places in the Dadaab refugee camp even the police will not go.
No, I don't believe that, because in Kenya everything is corruption. Everything that's killing us is corruption, nothing else. Al-Shabaab can go down from there, from Kismayu, through passing our roads with money. They end up where they will go to Nairobi. They will do there what they want, because of money.
How is the Dadaab refugee camp a security threat to the country?
We know, and we have proof that many Al-Shabaab combatants have used the camps as the hideouts. In fact, after fighting in Somalia and elsewhere, they come for leave to stay with their wives and children in the refugee camps.
The decision to close the Dadaab camp is final.
25 years is a long time to host such a large community. And I think Somalia needs these people back home.
About 2 hours' drive from Garissa town lies the largest refugee sanctuary in the world. Dadaab refugee camp, which lies 100 kilometers from the Somali border, is home to over 345,000 refugees who left Somalia in the 1990s fleeing the civil war. The numbers are slowly going down because of the current repatriation exercise. There are those who are leaving voluntarily, but then again, there are those like Fatma Mohammed who are adamant. When are you planning to go back yourself? Do you have a day or a month when you feel like you should be going back? Are you ready to go back yourself?
There is no particular time that I am planning to go back, unless when my country becomes peaceful and peace is seen to exist in my country. That is when I will go back.
For the refugees who are saying that come that deadline, they will not leave the camps, what is plan B?
The refugee camps can only be in Dadaab with the agreement of the government and UNHCR. So we will cross the bridge when we reach there.
Is there a point where we'll have forceful repatriation?
For now, we haven't started talking of that.
How long the repatriation exercise will truly take is not yet clear, despite the government's deadline to close it down by end of November 2016. Beyond the logistical nightmare of transferring the refugees from Kenya to Somalia, we wanted to find out why this camp has been labelled a breeding ground for terrorism by the government. What's the connection between the refugee camps with insecurity and terrorism?
The connection is there, and it is on a daily basis. So the existence of the camp is a threat to our national security, because over the past few years, most of the terror activities that has happened in this country have been traced in the Dadaab complex. And even as we speak, on a daily basis, we get intelligence of plots of potential attacks within the complex. We've been able to abort quite a number of attacks. We've been able to arrest suspects, and it's quite a challenge. It's quite a challenge.
The government's rationale for closing the camps is pegged on 3 reasons: security, environmental degradation and smuggling of contraband products into the country. But then there are those who disagree with these reasons.
My opinion is the government is disappointed that the international community may not be supporting the repatriation process, especially in getting those particular funds. They are frustrated. But we expected the frustration to be channeled in the right direction, not to be directed to innocent refugees who themselves are not part of this problem.
The government is on record initially citing a fall-off in the international funding for Dadaab refugee camp in favor of raising budgets to refugees fleeing the Syrian crisis and heading to the West.
When you look at now the Syrian crisis, the war broke out in 2011. So lots and lots of refugees have been fleeing Syria into neighboring countries. There are those, of course, who are heading to Europe through Turkey. There are those, of course, who've gone to countries like Jordan. And the assistance that has been given to these refugees, I mean, you can't compare to what has been given to us, Kenya, and also Africa.
12 days after the government announced closure of the camps and disbanding the Department of Refugee Affairs, Deputy President William Ruto traveled to Istanbul, Turkey, to front the Kenyan case in the World Humanitarian Summit.
Support from the international community, unfortunately, has been minimal, uncoordinated, and ad hoc.
This same message would be repeated when DP Ruto addressed the United Nations General Assembly in New York.
The international community pledged $500 million to support this exercise. And as I speak to you today, less than 1% of that money has been deposited in 5 years.
It's now an accepted fact by the international community, including the hosts here and the refugees, that the government is serious about closing down Dadaab refugee camp. This is one of the 5 camps here, Ifo2, and the locals here say that while the government is concerned about the security of this particular area and the entire country, they're saying that perhaps moving back to Somalia will be a gift to Al-Shabaab.
These are some of the potential boomerang effects of the decision by the government to repatriate the refugees. Because one, it will be plucking a number of people out of a situation and a place and environment where they've known as home for many years, almost 25 or so years. This is a long time. They've been in school here, they do business here, they are almost assimilating themselves to the local community in Northeastern. You have to remember all this. Then you pluck them all of a sudden and take them back. The effect of this could be extremely negative in terms of the psyche and attitude. It could, raise the question of collective punishment, And this notion of collective punishment is always, it always has a negative effect in terms of how those affected react to it. And this could be a potential recruiting, environment for Al-Shabaab.
I don't think so, because already the Al-Shabaab have got catchment within Somalia. I mean, Somalia, there's an 8 million population in Somalia of youth. Majority of them are youth. So what is 300,000 population in refugee camps? I don't see it. I know people are saying that way to deter or to slow down the repatriation process, but I don't think that's the way I view it myself.
Driving around Dadaab refugee complex feels like journeying through a mid-sized city. So vast is the camp that there is no official size on record. Some here say it has no end. Dadaab refugee complex has 5 camps: Ifo 1, Ifo 2, Daghale, Hagadera and Cambios. It has been nicknamed the 4th city in Kenya, with various business ventures and social activities running the economy of this part of the country. Dadaab is a strong economic hub. It's almost impossible to see it as a hotbed of extremism, but people who work here say the environment is peaceful but unpredictable. Anything can happen anytime. The astonishing growth of the camp in 25 years under the oppressive heat and fine dust has led to its newest title, the 48th county of the Republic of Kenya.
The Dadaab refugee complex is another county with own laws and regulations, and illegal. Everything there is illegal. Crime, we have got rapists there, we have got criminals there, we have got thieves there, and these things we don't want them to continue, flourishing in our territory.
But when did Dadaab lose its humanitarian character? Perhaps to answer this question is to go back to where it all started. How did Kenya get sucked into a refugee crisis of such epic proportions?
It did not begin straight away with the refugees. It began with covering the upheaval, the unrest, the political tumult in Somalia as the various clans ganged up against Siad Barre. And eventually, in 1991, they get rid of Siad Barre.
Mohammed Siad Barre was the third Somali president after a coup in 1969. His iron-fisted rule was marked by a war with Ethiopia, dubbed the Ogaden War. President Barre incited and inflamed clan rivalries to divert the attention of the public away from his unpopular regime. By the time his government collapsed after a 21-year military rule in 1991, an outbreak of inter-clan war had erupted. Without a central authority, feuding clans and militias, and a population on the brink of mass starvation, Siad Barre was eventually forced from power, leaving behind a trail of death and extreme hunger for a country with only 9 million people. The starvation of children and mothers stunned the world as the men fought on the streets with different rebel groups battling for power, plunging Somalia into anarchy. Several countries moved in to help as the UN made frantic efforts to bring sanity to a country whose armed factions were competing for influence in a power vacuum. It was only a matter of time before the horror and turmoil in Somalia spilled over into Kenya, and journalists picked out the initial signs of trouble in the future, perhaps prophesying the serious implications of the refugee crisis, mentioning two key things: security and the economy.
It was obvious to Kenyan journalists, and I recall the Nation's foreign editor, John Gashie, at the time saying, we are going to have a flood of refugees coming in. We had, as a publication, followed the tumult in Somalia. And when Siad Barre was overthrown, the narrative shifted to what next.
It was quite evident even at that particular time that the Somali regime then of Siad Barre was imploding from inside. And that the contrast and the divisions that were then internally, we are going to have Kenya sucked into it.
With no clear direction on how the Somalia crisis was going to be dealt with and the announcement of a ceasefire, former President Daniel Arap Moi started the push to have the Somali refugees go back to their country. That was July 15, 1991. As foreigners fled the failed state, Kenya became the transit point for all foreign workers and tourists caught up in the flares of Somalia's civil war. It was no longer a case close to home. Rather, its effects were now part of Kenya. There was no escaping.
Nairobi and Mogadishu, we have not always been close. Remember from the Ogaden War in 77, from that time, not even going back immediately after independence, the shifter movement, Nairobi and Mogadishu never were very close. The relationship was okay. I mean, we tolerated each other, but not that close.
Kenya's relations with Somalia have been what we call hate-love, and more hate than love. And even now, as we speak now, we have this very interesting relationship with the government in Mogadishu. But as you know very well, we still have issues that we haven't resolved. And those issues are as to where the border should be, And you know, just deeper behind that is really the issue of resources, offshore resources, oil and natural gas. And if you know, even now, there are a lot of issues vis-a-vis what is Kenya's interest in Somalia.
In a speech in Djibouti in 1991, retired President Moi said, and I quote, "As a neighbor, I have followed with keen interest the developments in Somalia, particularly since last year, and I have expressed my concern as well as the untold misery which has befallen women, children and the old, the majority of whom are now living in refugee camps." End of quote.
I had a chance to go up north to Dadaab, to go and see for ourselves, or for myself, what was it that was happening out. This camp that was growing, you have 1,000 today, tomorrow we are talking about 3,000, and it keeps growing. And you know how huge Dadaab became, actually the largest in the world.
Among the first group of refugees to land in Kenya was this group of 128 refugees fleeing the conflict. They arrived at the port of Mombasa from Kismayu as the narrative changed from the civil war in Somalia to what was going to happen next, with the spillover effect making headlines in Kenya.
I recall there was a shipwreck. Somalis were coming into Malindi, Mombasa, and there was a shipwreck. And it was on a Saturday, and our editor was Joe Kadhi. And Joe Kadhi issued instructions, we must get to Malindi. And we went to Malindi. There were more than 30, 40, 100 people dead.
Which year was that?
We're talking about 90.
By June 1997, 14,000 Somali refugees had settled in camps in Utange, Mombasa. What began as a one boatload of 860 fleeing Somalis resulted into over 11,000 refugees in Mombasa alone. In June 1994, the government of Kenya reportedly began its first refugee repatriation campaign when it asked the UNHCR to close down all camps at the coast province, from which the organization was assisting nearly 28,000 refugees in Utange, Marafa, Swalenguru, Hatimi and Jomvu. The UNHCR reportedly relocated the refugees to Kakuma camp and to Dadaab. In March 1997, the Kenyan authorities reportedly ordered the closure of 3 refugee camps following recurrent clashes between Kenyan villagers and the refugees, during which a refugee camp in Utange and Mombasa was reportedly burnt down.
We are reactive. We are not proactive. You know what I'm saying? When it comes to Somalia, we do not have, in my view, a fairly consistent long-term understanding of what it is that we want to gain and do in Somalia. So we are forced by circumstances to change and adapt to the prevailing situation. And at times, we then lose the larger picture.
So you find the donors reacting the very exact way that they used to in the 90s, in the 80s, whereby they just focus on, high profile emergency situations where they come in, they fund and, they support and make sure that the refugees are taken care of, and then they're out onto the next conflict. But now the nature of conflicts have changed. So I think for Kenya, they've studied the nature of conflicts, and they've seen the Somalia situation has been there since 1991. It's a protracted case. Therefore, the world needs to engage in a different manner than it used to before.
It is in this situation the UNHCR finds itself trying to play catch-up and manage an evolving refugee camp that keeps changing its character with dwindling resources, and now security is an issue.
Challenges also is security aspect, because as you have been there, it's not easy to go to the camp and then return, stay there and return when you want. You have some limitation because the camp is situated not far from the border, and we know very well that the bad guys called Al-Shabaab, and their element may cross anytime, and we have seen some incidents where people have been hijacked or attempt to hijack, and we had also from the government that there are some armed elements coming to the camp. So it's not very easy.
The nature of the camps is such that during the night, because they are not secured, anybody can sneak in and sneak out into the camp. And to the security agencies, it is quite a challenge. It's quite a challenge.
Judy Mukomwe Mutua, a teacher working with an NGO called Windle Trust International, was kidnapped in the Hagadera refugee camp in Dadaab on October 12, 2015. The 32-year-old was abducted by Al-Shabaab before she was rescued 7 days later by a combined rescue operation of Kenya Defence Force KDF and Somali National Army SNA at Shabadefu inside Somalia. Al-Shabaab were aiming at two things: get ransom and scare non-Somalis working in northern Kenya. October 2011, 2 aid workers were kidnapped from Ifo refugee camp in Dadaab. Gunmen abducted the 2 female Spanish workers and shot their driver before driving off towards Somalia. Is Dadaab refugee camp a security threat to the country? And is it true, the way the government is asserting, that there are terror elements that have been operating from within the camp itself?
Truly, we have seen some colleagues being hijacked and attempt hijacked, so there's a security element there. Whether it is from all the preparation or Dadaab's camp has been involved in Peketonia or Westgate, or we cannot confirm it, because this is we don't have intelligence information to say that this is from the camp.
We believe Dadaab has contributed immensely to the insecurity of this country. Why? We know that Dadaab has been the route for those who felt they could not penetrate this country through Mombasa, through Lamu, and therefore it was very easy for somebody to pretend to be a refugee and pass through Dadaab, because one, the government was constrained because of international conventions to allow refugees.
We allowed, as a country, the international community to have an enclave in Dadaab that was not perhaps answerable to Kenyan reality. And I would say this: Dadaab was to a large extent a United Nations or international NGO fiefdom, where Kenya as a country took a backseat. Undoubtedly, this was going to happen. In that, the people who came in, the people who sought refuge, we had no way of vetting, collaborating, and even controlling. Was that going to be an open season for people with other agendas? Yes, indeed. That's what Kenya is really paying. That we surrendered a lot of our security issues to NGOs that really didn't.
This camp is under the UN, UNHCR. So there is element of immunity. We respect, as a Kenyan, we are signatory to the conventions, that we respect that area as a UN institution.
Between the year 2013 and 2015, 5 police officers were killed in these 3 vehicles after being blown up by improvised explosive devices planted along the roads of the 5 Dadaab refugee complex. We drove to the spot where it happened, and officials here warned us against staying here for too long and raising unnecessary attention. Ifo refugee camp, we were told, was notorious with criminal gangs. How many operatives have you managed to arrest from the camps, and what type of weapons have you found from within the camps?
Been able to apprehend a number of Al-Shabaab terrorists who actually confessed. We've also arrested quite a number of Amniyat. Amniyat are the intelligence networks of the Al-Shabaab. even consisting of women and men who give intelligence, Whenever we go for operations, they already inform the Al-Shabaab that, okay, today, people are going for operations, be careful. We've also been able to capture or rather get huge caches of firearms and ammunition in the refugee camps, light weapons, arsenals of explosives, and heavy weapons.
Behind the temporary structures and tents, the government says these weapons are part of a stockpile of arsenal found hidden in unnamed blocks within the camp. Officials say the camp has now lost its humanitarian face and is now being exploited by Al-Shabaab to recruit and coordinate attacks in Kenya.
This has been the case, for example, in the Dadaab refugee complex in Kenya, where we have witnessed over the years, and specifically in the recent past, that terrorist attacks have been planned, executed from these refugee camps.
I think the government noticed, or it was awakened after after the Westgate attack. Not that the government did not have an idea that Dadaab was actually being utilized by suspected terrorists or militias from Al-Shabaab, but after the Westgate, there was serious confirmation by other assisting intelligence organizations that confirmed to the government that actually the planning, the routing, and the execution of the Westgate attack was actually perpetuated inside Dadaab camp.
With the help of the FBI and Israeli intelligence, information started flowing between the various agencies, and Dadaab became one of the most monitored places in the country.
The evidence is there. Most of this information is classified. Government doesn't wake up giving information which is classified to the population. But it reaches a time when you say enough is enough. In fact, Al-Shabaab have their own intelligence wing within the complex. So whatever we do, they get counterintelligence within the complex. They also have their own wives and concubines.
NTV has learned through security briefs that Al-Shabaab intensified their recruitment and setting up the intelligence wing Amniyat under the guise of being refugees in 2007. Al-Shabaab established a communication network using VHF radio to carry out its activities and monitor security operations between Somalia and Kenya along the border.
Even the phone calls, there's something we call in intelligence triangulation. Density of communication and triangulation. So when that point where they triangulate builds up, then you start ticking. That's why sometimes you are told that we intercepted their communication. They start with one, but it keeps on upper. So this one comes, this one comes, one comes. Then you see it building up here. And the more the frequent it is, the more things are being. They can't share such a things with you. Yeah.
According to the intelligence briefs, the communications central hub was a cell within Dadaab refugee camp where the operator was able to connect to members of Al-Shabaab masquerading as herders along the border. The intelligence briefs identified chemists, supermarkets and madrasas that were being used as fronts disguised as business entities but supporting Al-Shabaab. The madrasas mentioned are Haramain and Masjid Najah that have been associated with the late Mohammed Kuno. NTV has learnt from security sources that chemists have been used to provide Medicare to Al-Shabaab operatives in areas like Boni Forest or Somalia.
After these combatants go and fight either in Somalia with AMISOM and whatever, they get injured, they come to the refugee camps for treatment. And for a break, stay for a while, get recuperated, and go back to combat again to fight.
Eric Ogada and Ramadan Kufungwa, Al-Shabaab operatives, are said to have taken advantage of the camps to facilitate movements of new recruits, wives and weapons to Somalia or from Somalia. Ogada, who grew up in Nairobi, is identified as the women's recruiter.
The thing about terrorist cells is that it's very difficult to know where they exist and who they are. Because from research we know that even the cells themselves don't know each other. They have no idea who is in what cells and what cells exist where. So this is a completely covert thing that can occur anywhere, And yes, the camp environment can provide a better environment for hiding.
According to intelligence briefs seen by NTV, Ogada had his facilitators, one based at Ifo camp, who was mainly in charge of travel documentation to Nairobi for Somali aliens, including Al-Shabaab members, as well as in assisting wives of Somali-based Kenyan operatives to secure safe passage to Nairobi. In 2015, Ramadan Kufungwa managed to have his wife, Rukia Mbaraka Faraj, who is also on the most wanted list with 2 million Kenyan shillings bounty, escape a police dragnet through Hagadera refugee camp in Dadaab, through the border and into Somalia.
We are the border, a very porous border. Nobody's capable to control up to now. These are people who have been here. They understand the environment. They understand the region better than anybody else now.
The Westgate Mall attack, investigated by local and foreign intelligence agencies, found that the planning was done years before the execution in Somalia by the top Al-Shabaab leadership led by the late Ahmed Godane. Some of the operatives involved in the attack that killed 67 people at Westgate initially came from Hagadera refugee camp and Kakuma before they got recruited into Al-Shabaab. The arms used during the attack was sneaked in from Somalia to Nairobi through the Hagadera refugee camp. Substantial planning for the attack was conducted at the Kakuma refugee camp in Turkana County, where the group had established infrastructure. This was for the purposes of escaping heavy surveillance at Dadaab refugee camp and exploiting the light security surveillance at Kakuma camp after realizing that local cells had been under observation.
Al-Shabaab got a very, very conducive and safe haven in the refugee camps. Number one, they get free food there. They get free medication there. They have got the aliens cards, some of them, the refugee cards. They can hide easily in the camps because it has got the immunity of the United Nations. And therefore, this was a safe, the best place to operate, without being noticed.
The Westgate attack was executed by Hassan Abdi Mohammed Duhulo, a Norwegian national of Somali origin. Duhulo was relocated from Kenya to Norway through the Refugee Relocation Program. He left Norway in 2010 for Somalia and joined Al-Shabaab, where he was trained and fought alongside the militia. Mohammed Abdi Nur was a Somali refugee from Abdallah clan in Somalia. He entered the country in 2008 with his auntie's family through Dadaab, but was later transferred to Kakuma when authorities wanted to ease congestion in the camp. He was a pupil at Gambela Primary School within the camp until 2010 when he left for Somalia to train with the Al-Shabaab. Ahmed Hassan Abubakar also first came to Kenya in 2008 as a refugee. He stayed at Dadaab refugee camp before being relocated to Kakuma refugee camp. Abdi Nur and Abubakar left for Somalia to join Al-Shabaab in 2010. Another accomplice was Yahe Osman Ahmed, also known as Arab, also known as Yaha Golis. After the Westgate attack, plans for the next attack were underway. All coordination was still being done in Somalia.
Yes, the same high command in Somalia is the same high command that gave orders for Westgate, gave orders from Peketoni, and gave orders for Garissa. The same cell that was used inside our Kenyan territory is the same cell that was in charge of all these attacks. So yes, they are all connected.
According to classified security briefs connecting the Garissa University College attack that left 147 students dead to the refugee camps, one name stands out. That of the late Mohammed Duliadin Kuno, also known as Gamadere. Sources have told NTV that Kuno sneaked into Dadaab refugee camp at will and would spend nights with one of his wives who hid in the camp, get information, then go back to Somalia.
Nobody at some point placed this guy to be the head of what he was, because he went there as a madrasa teacher.
A killer whose followers dreaded meeting if they failed in their mission. Kuno was described as the devil incarnate. Sources privy to his life say he was ruthless and had no room for failure. He killed his own disciples when they failed to perform to his expectations. Kuno coordinated the operatives who carried out the attack on Garissa University College. They were hosted by other cell members at Ifo refugee camp. Weapons used during the attack were hidden in Hagadera refugee camp and Garissa town to avoid security detection. The intelligence briefs revealed that the surveillance and casing of the university were carried out by another cell member who was based in Hagadera but escaped after the attack. Movement of the operatives and other facilitation were coordinated by Al-Shabaab's intelligence unit based in Garissa and Hagadera camp in Dadaab. A man linked to Mohammed Duliadin Kuno's network and who was involved in the Garissa University College attack was intercepted in Mokidar area within the outskirts of Garissa town from Hagadera refugee camp. We will not reveal the name of the man because of ongoing investigations, but he helped security agents recover weapons that had been buried underground. 7 pistols, 5 hand grenades, 19 9mm caliber rounds of ammunition among others were recovered. It turned out that one of the persons arrested had been sent to get the weapons and take them back to Hagadera refugee camp to be handed over to other operatives for possible attacks on unspecified targets. Further investigations into the network led to the apprehension of another individual who led detectives to more weapons that were hidden in this house in Garissa town. We drove to where he lived, but were warned of a hostile reception if we thought of coming out of our vehicle to ask questions. The man who lived in this house hid the weapons used in the Garissa University College attack. The weapons were buried in his living room. When they were dug out, the security team found an assortment of weapons kept in this plastic drum. Among the weapons recovered included 3 AK-47 rifles, 7 rocket-propelled grenades, 4 hand grenades, 227 rounds of ammunition, TNT powder detonators and several IEDs timers and IEDs metallic carriers. It was also confirmed that the second batch of the weapons recovered by the team of investigators were remnants of the weapons used in the Garissa University College attack. Events prior to the Garissa University attack reveal that on 1st of April 2015, an Al-Shabaab facilitator in Garissa was requested to accommodate 2 young men who were coming to Garissa for an operation. After the evening prayer, the 2 youths were brought to his house. They were in possession of 2 bags, a suitcase and a backpack. The bag was full of ammunition and 2 AK-47 rifles with a foldable butt. The 2 young men were Abdi Rahim Abdullahi, the lawyer who was the key cell leader in Garissa University College attack, and the other was Khalid Isa Hassan, formerly a banker at the First Community Bank. At about 3 in the morning of 2nd April 2015, Abdi Rahim woke up and made several phone calls. Then about 4:30 a.m., the 2 youths loaded the heavy bags into a vehicle that had come to pick them up. In the vehicle were 2 other unknown occupants alongside the driver, making a total of 5 in the vehicle and headed to an unknown destination. The other 2 were the rest of Garissa University College attack assailants, and they were Zakawi Ali and Mohammed Said. At about 5:30 in the morning, the attack happened. Talking to refugees here, it was evident that none knew anything about Al-Shabaab having a cell within the camp. One of the reasons why the government wants to close this refugee camp is the connection with terrorists and the operatives who've been hiding arms in the camp and using the camp to hide. Are these statements true?
It is false because people here are all refugees and majority are women and children. Nobody would like to get into problems that don't exist. It is an issue that don't exist here in the camp.
Hadija Mohammed came here in 1991 when she was 3 years old. She is now married and has 3 children. She doesn't know any other life outside Dadaab refugee camp.
We work with the government of Kenya very closely. We do checkups in the blocks and sections about any insecurity elements around us, which are not, and it is very unfortunate now that they say these things are in the camps, and none has been proven to be here.
There are no proper structures to monitor movement in Dadaab refugee camp. It was alarming to find out how easy it is for anyone to sneak in and out. For human traffickers, smuggling of persons into and out of Dadaab is big business. How serious is the issue of human trafficking?
It's quite serious, but over the years it is now subsiding. Mostly what would happen is they would bring people from Somalia, and Dadaab would be a transit point, and then these people would later be moved to Nairobi, and from Nairobi to other countries.
Do we know their modus operandi?
We have a group of people who this is their business, and they would mobilize them from Somalia at a fee, bring them to Dadaab at a fee, and then moving from Dadaab to Nairobi is also at a fee. Then from Nairobi to other countries also at a fee. So it's somebody's business.
Our investigations led us to a former human trafficker. To hide his identity, we will call him Noor. He volunteered to show us how they used to move Al-Shabaab operatives and other refugees from Dadaab camps to other parts of the country. It starts with using unmanned roads to avoid security detection. Then they must also avoid towns and populated areas. This is one of the cut lines that the traffickers use to move Somalis from Dadaab refugee camp. They come through this way and they cross this main road from Garissa town going to Modogashe. Then they branch on this other end and use this other cut line to make their way to Garissa town. We set off through the bush where there was no phone network as Noor revealed the secrets behind the trafficking syndicate and the people involved. The journey took us 2.5 hours between the refugee camp and Garissa town. An hour into the journey, there was no sign of life around us. Noor revealed that those trafficked were gathered together in large numbers and put on different buses. Na wanapitishwa aje basi wakiwa kwa basi? Si inasimamishwa na polisi? Si wanaelewana. Siko kuelewana. Na polisi? Sasa ni nani anaelewana na polisi? Hao wenyewe ama ni mwenye na traffic? Wana conductor. Kwa hivyo conductor ndio trafficker. Kwa hivyo conductor anajua wale watu wako hapo ndani. Conductor ndio amechukua hiyo contract ya kupeleka mpaka Nairobi. Na ile masaa wanapenda kutumia ni usiku ama mchana? Basi hapa sinapitanga mchana, hata asubuhi saa 3 inapita. Kwa hivyo ukiona basi ikikuja ile imetoka Dadaab asubuhi inapitanga hapa inaingia Nairobi saa 10. Sasa hizi kuna wale wanahepa. Si watu wamejaa msituni wanahepa huko. Hata saa hizi? Hawataki kurudi Somalia. Hawataki. Wanasanywa mahali, wakisanywa mahali wakitosha kama gari mzima wanapakiliwa wanakuja na barabara. Alafu wanaenda wapi? Mpaka Nairobi. Nairobi, South Africa, Angola, wanaenda. Unajua watu mostly wakangi Nairobi. Wanatafuta mpango wa kwenda ngambo. Wanasanywa ndani ya kambi iko watu wenye hiyo kazi, brokers. Wanasanywa, wanalipa pesa sasa, wanaagana siku moja, wanaita gari. Na wanalipa kama pesa ngapi hivi kwa broker? Kwa mtu mmoja, nimesikia mtu mmoja ni kama
22,000 each person.
22,000 ya broker.
Bana pamoja na barabara ya mafuta ya gari
mpaka Nairobi. Na wanatumia gari gani?
Mostly wanatumia kama Probox ama Land Cruiser.
Na wanatoka aje Kenya wanaenda mpaka South Africa, wanatumia njia gani mpaka wafike huko?
Iko connection umefunga.
Na connection ni kwa airport ama ni wapi? Ama wanatumia barabara kwenda mpaka South Africa?
Sasa zingine hata msikia mama wanabeba na container.
Watu wanakaa kwa container mpaka South Africa?
Kwani unaona kwamba nini television semekana kwa watu kiasi fulani walikufia ndani ya container. Askari anaona tu ni container ya mafuta. Kumbe yuko watu 100 ndani.
Hao watu wanafanya nini traffic? Sasa mtu anaanza aje?
Sasa kama for example si mimi tunajuana. Mimi ndo nafanya hiyo deal. Na kueleza wewe unakuwa sasa unachukua kutoka Nairobi na unapeleka mbali ama Garissa peleka Nairobi. For example mimi niko Refugee au uko Garissa, mimi nakwambia na kutumia watu ukifika kwako wewe ndio kufanya namna ya kusafirisha.
Na hivyo ndio Al-Shabaab pia wanafanya.
Al-Shabaab ni kama mtu tofauti. Huwezi jua ni hata yeye mahali anasafiri Al-Shabaab unajua ana picha kwa uso. Binadamu tu kama sisi.
Sote hao wanatumia hizi njia. Na ni wengi wanatumia?
Watu wengi sana wanatumia. Unaona magari hapa Nyali.
Hii magari si official, inafaa kupita hapa.
Kwa ile gari imepita hapa, hiyo gari iko na nia yake tu.
And then we came across the only van on this road in our 2.5-hour journey. After passing each other, we stopped our vehicle. They also stopped. No one wanted to get out as we suspected the people inside were being trafficked. After an awkward 3-minute silence, we all drove away, each minding the business. Noor explained that normally if they suspected the police were on their trail, they would abandon the vehicle and run into the bush. The evidence is here at Garissa Police Station, where abandoned vehicles were left in the bush and brought here by the police after the occupants escaped arrest as they were being smuggled into the town from Dadaab refugee camp. So far, no one has showed up to claim them. Noor says it's more expensive for a refugee to bribe their way out of a police situation than it is to leave their vehicle and run, hoping for the best.
Nakwambia gari hiyo Probox imenunua 200. Na nikishikwa ile pesa nitalipa kwa kotini na polisi zaidi ya 200. Ndio Probox huko Somalia ni bei sana.
Ni pesa ngapi?
300. Kama iko second hand kidogo unapata na 200. Unaomba ni fake zote.
We wanted to find out how the refugees, including Al-Shabaab, are trafficked from the camp to Nairobi.
Hapa Garissa kuelekea Nairobi kuna roadblocks na polisi wengi. Wanapita aje?
Huko ni basi. Fika Garissa sasa. Unaingia basi.
Alafu basi kuna mwingine atakutraffic mpaka Nairobi ama?
Si ni conductor. Conductor from Garissa to Nairobi analipa 15k each person. Sema kwambia mtu akifika sasa refugee area. Sio unachukua refugee area. Unalipa 22k. Sawa? So umepita kichorotoro yote. Iko mtu umelipa hapa hakuna? Umefika Garissa salama. Sio? Katika ile pesa ile 22 umelipwa unapatia 15,000 conductor. Aanze kazi yake kutoka Garissa mpaka Nairobi.
So akisimamishwa na polisi kwa barabara, yeye vile amelipa hana wasiwasi.
Hawezi simamishwa, atasimamishwa na mali. Conductor anapiga simu kila abiria wanajuana, si anapita kila siku.
So anapiga simu, anapigia polisi. Anamwambia tuko njiani na nimebeba watu fulani.
Fulani wamekaa kwa kiti fulani.
So wanaenda hivyo mpaka wanafika Nairobi sili. So kwa hiyo 15 polisi pia kuna ile atakula.
Lazima. Polisi nikicheki tu anaweza kula kwa mtu mmoja 2,000. Kwa mtu mmoja 2,000. Bila bila kwa mtu mmoja 2,000. Na hivyo conductor ndo anapata faida kubwa kuliko polisi.
Na haijalishi kama ni amebeba Al-Shabaab ama amebeba mtu wa kawaida.
Sasa yeye atajua na mali mtu ni mma. Hana sign yoyote ambayo unajua kama ni Al-Shabaab. Anaweza kuwa
hivyo ndio bunduki pia zinasafirishwa.
Bunduki pia inasafirishwa hivyo.
The astonishing confession from Noor, who has done this job for many years, sounded like a normal casual conversation. But the reality of how difficult the war on terror is became all too real.
But you know that some of the lapses that we get in our insecurity is because of corruption. Either our security forces are being compromised because of money, either our administrators are being compromised because of money, and two, our own fellow Kenyans are being compromised because of money. Because all this story, when you read about it, it involves money changing hands. We have many stories where money has exchanged hands between refugees and government officials as they move from Dadaab to Nairobi and disappear in the Kenyan population.
There was a UN report which listed Nairobi as a major conduit for drug trafficking. When poaching has come in, Nairobi again has been named a major conduit for poaching and a major conduit for human trafficking. I reckon, even at that time, but those challenges were there, but it was a trickle. Now it's looking like a flood in the three cases.
There is a self-imposed curfew in Dadaab. No police officer goes to the refugee camp at night. This is one of the most dangerous times to be spotted in the camp.
At night in the camps, they are basically slums, so they are not planned. It's not wise to move into the camps at night because an explosive can be thrown into you. So we don't advise people to get into the camps at night.
A local security committee arrangement within Dadaab takes over activities here at night. This is the Refugee Vigilante group here in Agadera. They do this sort of thing every night. They do night patrols, going door to door, stopping people, asking them questions, finding out who they are, where they are going and where they're coming from. And this is the sort of thing they do, trying to establish who are the people who are coming in for the first time and who is not conversant with this particular area. They say that this is the time when Al-Shabaab operatives normally come into the camp, hiding in here, and to carry out their activities and monitoring the activities that go on here with police patrols. And so they monitor that kind of situation and then they report to the local law enforcers. Police are not welcome here at this hour because it's too dangerous. The refugee population here has organized itself and formed security committees led by these men. They do patrols from block to block up to certain hours in the night. But lack of enough people and proper equipment to manage a camp with almost 500,000 people is quite challenging. It was also evident that this kind of arrangement clearly wasn't working for security agents and wasn't the most pleasing. So how does the vigilante then work? The ones who patrol at night, do they help police also in collecting intelligence or giving information?
Really, it doesn't work for us. Probably it works for the refugees, but for us, it has not worked for us. I think I'm very categorical about that. It hasn't worked for us. If you say there is a vigilante, yet every night there are people sneaking in and sneaking out, and we don't get the information, that means we have people who have already been compromised.
Proximity to the border has been raised as one of the biggest challenges in managing the huge complex. But as I leave Dadaab, the biggest issue is, will the insecurity problem in the country be solved by closure of the camp?
Dadaab was the biggest. We had a few places, Mombasa, Nairobi, Isiolo. Isiolo was like the recruiting ground for militia, Al-Shabaab. So once you deal with a space that was majorly organizing and planning the execution, then the rest of the cells will need to reorganize themselves within their spaces that are very small because of constant surveillance for them to be able to execute what could have been done in Dadaab. So Dadaab was a major, like the high command. So the rest were feeding into this.
So far, the government has not shown any sign of reversing its decision to close down Dadaab refugee camp. And as the sun sets on the horizon, so do the many lives that called this place home for over 2 decades. What the future holds in terms of security will only be judged with time. Dennis Okari, NTV Investigates.